Kyle Poe was a partner in BigLaw, and he left that job to become the VP of Legal Innovation and Strategy at Legora, a legal AI startup. In this interview, Kyle explains why he sees a generational reordering happening in the legal profession right now, how law firms are and can institutionalize partner knowledge as IP for the first time ever, and where the moat exists for lawyers as AI gets better and better at doing the work itself. Thank you for listening, and thank you to the presenting sponsor of this episode, Altitude. Altitude is a payments platform that offers both stablecoins and fiat rails. If you want to understand why they are the sponsor of this episode, visit altitude.xyz/law. Now, this episode and this conversation begins with Kyle sharing the most interesting questions lawyers are asking today about legal AI. This is a good one. Here's Kyle.
I think that what's the most interesting questions that I get where most firms aren't asking this is when they think about firm structure. It's one thing to think about pricing. I mean, every lawyer out there has thought about the billable hour, has thought about alternative fee arrangements and the death of the billable hour, which has been predicted for years. But very few are thinking about the incentives that the billable hour drives, and particularly the incentives at both the associate and the partner level. I mean, associates in a firm today, they usually have a billable hour target, and so their incentives are to run up the clock. And that's true regardless of the fee structure underneath, right? So if an associate is working on two matters, one that's hourly, one that's flat fee, their incentives are the same, but the incentives for the firm are diametrically opposed, right? The firms that are leading the way are ones that are thinking about how they will adjust those expectations and those incentive structures for their associates. But I think what's even more interesting is at the partner level, even rarer do people ask about this or think about this. The incentives at firms, there is a conflict of interest with partners and their firms, right? Like partners are always at risk of leaving, of being poached by another firm, of walking out the door with all the knowledge and experience that they have, taking clients with them, potentially taking associates with them, potentially. And that's hugely costly for firms. And so as firms are approaching, the most innovative firms, as they're thinking about this, they're thinking, really, how do we reinvent a law firm, right? And when you reinvent a law firm in a world of AI, it's no longer just people who are where you store all of your knowledge and experience and skills, but now it's in technology. And so the ability to create, particularly as we entering into this agentic era, the ability to take the knowledge and experience of your lawyers, of your partners in particular, and encode them into reusable skills that will become the firm's IP, right? That is going to be the equivalent of what is source code is to Apple. These agentic skills will be to law firms of the future. It's affecting things like their talent acquisition strategies, their lateral partner strategies, right? The sophisticated firms are thinking, okay, what are the skills? Not just what platform can we add partners into that would augment our existing practices, but what data moats do partners out there have that we might be able to bring into our firm if we bring those partners in? What skills, what knowledge, experience are they going to come to our firm and not just add to the bottom line, but actually to add IP to the firm that will persist with the firm over time? And so the incentive structures there for partners are longer time horizons than normal, right? Most partnerships, they pay out at the end of the year, disbursements to the partnership, to the partners. But now there's this kind of other form of competitive advantage that persists over time. It's no longer a matter of what is this partner going to do in year one, year two. It's also what is this partner going to bring as a longer term competitive moat for the firm, going forward into the future. And so the truly innovative firms are thinking about it kind of at that layer.
And so do you think that's why we're starting to see these huge buyouts and packages given to lure partners from other firms because they can institutionalize that knowledge in a way that wasn't before possible?
Yeah, I don't know. I won't speculate that that's entirely what's driving that phenomenon, but I do know for a fact that is motivating a lot of these firms in their talent acquisition strategies now. So again, not all firms are doing it, are probably moving based on those factors, but I think we are going to see that accelerate. So my prediction would be that we're going to see this trend of lateral movement actually accelerate, because in the future, once the firm does have all the knowledge and experience kind of encoded of their lawyers, that's going to really decrease the portability of work. And so the firms that figure out, okay, how do we incentivize people now to bring that knowledge and experience? How do we win the war for talent? And I mean, AI is, the truly advanced firms are thinking, how does AI factor into how we win the war for talent for associates, but particularly at that partner level. So but once that knowledge and experience is encoded into IP, that's going to be very sticky, right? Like now, if a partner walks out the door and goes across the street, they're not taking that IP with them. And so it will take time for them to have to rebuild that IP at a new firm. And then by that time, it might take 6 months for them to rebuild that IP that they've created at their new firm. And that gives a window of opportunity for the kind of the departing from the firm they left from to patch over the client relationship. And meanwhile, the firm that they left from has a copy of all that knowledge and experience in the form of these agentic skills that remains behind. So you're going to see kind of two things. One is exactly what we're already seeing, which is this acceleration in lateral movement before it kind of shuts down, before it all kind of starts to lock down, because the firms now have these moats, these IP moats that just didn't exist before.
That's a really interesting perspective, Kyle. And I know you've spoken about this generational reordering that is happening in the legal profession. You compared it to the 1980s hostile takeover era. One thing that I've seen is that plenty of people said something similar with the internet and email, and as the world came online, that they were going to reshape the profession. But the top firms have largely stayed the same over the past couple decades. Why? And I think you just gave a good example, really, of how AI is changing things in a more radical way than we saw before.
Yeah, I mean, you know, word processing, changed how obviously it goes from handwriting to like, say a typewriter, or a typewriter to word processing. It didn't change how the analysis was done. It didn't affect the reasoning. Even electronic research, yeah, it allowed you to do better research, faster research, more effective, cost-efficient research, but it didn't do the work. The best analogy for what we're facing is actually e-discovery, right? So e-discovery is an area where actually like kind of it's the first generation of AI in law was actually e-discovery. And so our e-discovery friends out there, when they hear conversations like this, they're like, why are they acting like this is the first time AI has come to law? Like this is actually like the second one. And we had this microcosm. The thing is that with predictive coding and traditional machine learning in the e-discovery space, e-discovery used to, before all that, 30 years ago, discovery and document review and document production was like the bread and butter of every single large firm. It was a huge source of revenue, a huge source of billable hours, a huge source of leverage for these firms. It was all billable hour basis. And then along came technology that really replaced a lot of the work, right? It did the work. Like predictive coding did the work of what would have been an associate before. And so when the technology starts to do the work, it actually becomes a new means of production. The economics then have to shift. And we saw that in e-discovery, right? So most large firms now don't really do like large scale document review as like part of the life of a first, second, or third year associate, right? This is now outsourced largely to ALSPs and other firms that have, like my alma mater, where they did invest very heavily and made e-discovery its own practice group. And so, of course, that work has transformed, right? Like it left the traditional firms. By and large, it went to new market entrants. The pricing structure of that work changed to more flat fees, or things like, technology charges that with a markup, like, the charging by the gigabyte, for example, in the context of e-discovery. And so kind of entirely new pricing models came about. But of course, with e-discovery, it was bounded, right? If you were a transactional lawyer, or even, an appellate lawyer, or anybody else outside of the discovery space, it was very easy during the past 30 years to look at what's happening with e-discovery and say, well, that's cool and that makes sense for them, but there's no way predictive coding is going to help me write my brief to the Supreme Court. And so there were natural bounds that meant that, yes, there was going to be transformation, but it was going to have limits. Whereas with AI today, generative AI and the large language models, there are, so far as we can tell, no natural boundaries, right? Like this can extend to virtually every aspect of legal practice. Not to say that it's going to replace every single task or everything that lawyers do, but it's going to reach into all these different practice areas. And so if we look at the example of e-discovery, we would expect that it's going to have similar effects. Because again, unlike internet, unlike electronic research, AI today, just like e-discovery over the past 30 years, does the work.
Yeah, and one thing that you emphasized in your prior answer, which I think is such a good frame mindset for law firms and for managing partners to have, which is how do we institutionalize this knowledge? Could you give a granular, either an example or just talk more granularly about how law firms that are best operationalizing LLMs like and tools like Legora, What are they doing to institutionalize that knowledge?
Yeah, I think there are a couple of aspects to this. I think the first is adoption of the tools, right? So there's kind of different layers to this. I mean, the most important in and sort of the easiest, well, the easiest is just to get the licenses, but that gets you nothing. Uh, just getting the licenses actually doesn't change anything. The next is to drive kind of broad usage, even if at first it's shallow, right? These tools are going to be fundamental to how every single lawyer operates and practices in the future. And so being able to have your entire workforce, upskilled in these tools is sort of the most important first step. And I think a lot of firms are actually getting really good at that. Getting the tools into everybody's hands, educating them on sort of the basic use cases, giving them use cases that are, sample use cases and sample documents that are relevant to their practice area so they can see, okay, it's useful for these 3 or 4 things that they do every day. So they can start to integrate these tools as part of their daily work, right? Because most people today do not have the muscle memory of using these tools. There will be in firms today where people will, go do a due diligence, and then, they'll have a coworker say to them, well, why didn't you use Legora's tabular review to help with like the data extraction, some of the first round of that diligence? And they'll say, oh, well, I forgot about it. I didn't think about that, because they don't have that muscle memory. So the most important piece is, and the first piece, of course, is just get a broad adoption so that people can start to develop the muscle memory of using these tools as part of their daily life. That's fairly easy, and I think a lot of firms are starting to figure out how to do that. And of course, we here at Legora, we pride ourselves on helping with those change management pieces. The tougher thing is the encoding of knowledge, right, into these agentic skills, and this is very new territory. We launched our agentic operating system, what we call AOS, which is our agentic harness on top of the large language models. We launched that about a month ago. And so this is all very, very new. And the ability to create skills is all very new. So the firms that are successful are driving adoption, I would say top down and bottom up, right? It's not enough just to give everybody the tools and hope that they're going to encode their knowledge and experience into reusable skills. That will for sure happen. And when that does, it's really important to have tooling that we provide at Legora to be able to see where those skills are being created and how often they're being used, so the firm can see that. So if there is a pocket of innovation in this practice area over here, the firm can come in there and validate that those skills are the appropriate skills and that they're using the technology appropriately, and then evangelize that and spread that to other people. So really championing from the bottom up is one really important move. It's also important to invest from the top down. So firms that have knowledge management teams or innovation teams are, like, most of the time they're repurposing those people or moving those people into these new AI roles. A lot of firms don't have those resources on staff, and so they're looking to hire very aggressively to bring on legal engineers, innovation people, process management folks as well. So that's a whole another aspect of you're building out a support structure inside of the firm so that you can do it on a top-down motion, because most lawyers don't have the time or the interest to create these organically. And so you need to be able to think about it from the top and be able to take, knowledge and experience, to take the precedents that maybe exist in your document management system and take that information using AI to then create these skills and then push those down on the firm. And then the third aspect is, so the first is kind of breadth, right? Then it's depth from both from bottom up and from top down. And then the other piece is thinking about the economics. So it's not just about the tools and using the tools and having, really killer use cases. It's about thinking about what this means for, again, the billable hour, and for all the incentive structures that we talked about. So that's really thinking about how do we reinvent the law firm. And it's not abstract. I mean, there are AI native law firms that are coming out, every day, and they are approaching this from a blank slate. And they are thinking, what does it mean if we can start from an entirely blank slate where we don't have just massive teams of associates, we don't have massive real estate, we don't have to worry about the billable hour, we can just start anew in terms of how we do the work and how we price the work. And this is creating pressure. These AI native startups are creating pressure on the legacy firms. And Legora is, in a lot of ways, a bet that the legacy players will be able to adapt. And we've had great success with our customers already, and there's not all firms will adapt, but there will be a number of them that are able to. And it's my job in particular, as well as Legora's job, to help those firms make that pivot.
I want to talk about what the future might look like, because some people hypothesize that with AI now, there's going to be more contracts, more disputes, and then much faster commerce, more demand for lawyers. Some think that the opposite will occur. There'll be less demand for lawyers. People will do it themselves. We'll have sort of chat GPT style attorneys where they're self-represented litigants. Where do you see the future landing between those two extremes?
Yeah, it's going to play out differently across different practice areas. I mean, there undoubtedly are certain practice areas which will be commoditized, right? Where like it's the AI gets super good at it, and everybody has access to the tools, and there's no real differentiation, right, between the different firms anymore. And so a lot of that is going to the pricing of that will kind of a lot of will go down, right? It'll become a lot cheaper, just as it becomes a lot easier to deliver those legal services. I think that on the flip side, though, the most premium work will stay, even more premium, right? Like, because exactly what you said. I mean, people, we're having this conversation in the context of AI, like of legal AI in the legal industry, but it's really important to talk to other people outside of legal, right? People who are in corporate America, who are in large corporations that are using these tools today, because they will tell you that it's the expectation is very broad to use these tools, right? It's changing. My wife tells me about how she's using AI like every day and how it's transformed like how much her work product is, and she's not a lawyer. And so it's amazing how much faster kind of business is getting done, right?
Mhm.
More deals are getting done, more products are being developed, more drugs will be developed than ever before using AI. And so just as there's more economic activity that AI is fueling, that of course fuels the demand for more M&A, more transactions. I mean, we're not too far away from a day in which a person can graduate from law school and can then just sign up for an AI tool, which then allows them to be like, still legitimately practicing lawyer, where it gives them the templates and the skills and the legal research and everything that they would need to go hang out their shingle, right? So we're going to see an explosion in the access to justice front, which is going to mean, if people all of a sudden have, we all have had more rights than we could vindicate, right? It's one of the sad things, frankly, about the legal profession, is that we have failed 90% of people who have legal needs, but they don't have access to. There's no economical solution for them to find a lawyer if they don't qualify for a public aid. They're just priced out of the market. As these people now have access to legal services, you're going to see a massive increase in of litigation. I mean, we're already seeing this. I mean, there's already been studies that are out there in terms of like the pro se filings. There's been a massive influx in the number of pro se filings. That's definitely going to continue. And they're going to get, of course, as these tools get better, those pro se filings are going to get, like, today they may look legitimately good, but if they use ChatGPT, maybe they have a hallucination. But like, in the very near term, like these are going to be really high quality briefs that are complaints that people are filing, petitions. And so this is going to cause a massive increase in of filings on the plaintiff side, which is of course going to cause a massive increase in demand for defense lawyers as well. So there's different dynamics that you really need to think about, kind of each practice area and sort of what drives the need for those legal services, to then figure out, okay, and then of course, what's the complexity and what are the different competitive advantages that different firms may have today, as well as what will AI do over time to those different competitive advantages. But at the top of the end of the market, it's very much, it's going to be higher value, right? Like it's going to be even more a higher premium of work. And so we're likely to see rates, particularly at top firms, the rates themselves, hourly rates, where the billable hours still exist, are likely to continue to ratchet upwards. Like it's not inconceivable to think of a $10,000 billable hour in the next couple of years, just because the capacity expansion of these lawyers is going to be so much greater than it was before. What they're going to be able to do, what that one partner is going to be able to do with AI is, basically it'll be that one person plus AI, which will have, maybe replaced 3 or 4 associates that they would have had kind of in the past.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And just thinking about it from a leverage perspective with the internet and email and the ability to search Westlaw for cases, that made the billable hour, I'd argue, maybe 5x more valuable than it was prior. Now you're looking at maybe 10x. And if you take the billable hours, which range between 1,000 to 2,500, you multiply those 10x, you're getting 10x the value. You're probably going to be charged 10x the price. But agreed, it's going to be really, really interesting to see what happens in the future. Just 2 more questions for you, Kyle, and this has been a great discussion. One is, where do you see the moat remaining for lawyers when it comes to AI?
There's, professional services organizations, there's this kind of famous breakdown of like, there's 3 types of roles where you can be either kind of a grinder, a minder, or a finder. And that's to say you can either kind of do the grunt work, you can either manage the work of other people, or you can source the work and, have the client relationships. And so AI is very fast attacking the grinding piece of that, right? It's going to replace or heavily augment the doing of the work. And so, the idea of being a practitioner where you just learn like one niche area of the law and you just sit in your office all day and like churn away thinking about like the same problems over and over again, that probably is going to be a less viable career path. But what it means is that those are all part of a kind of production pipeline, those different kind of tasks. And when one bottleneck in a production pipeline is removed, the pressure moves to the other kind of nodes in the pipeline. And so as the grinding becomes, commoditized, where it becomes everybody has that scale, everybody has access to the same tools that can do a lot of the grinding work, there will be a lot of the value is going to migrate up the chain. And so, of course, what it means to manage work, though, is also this like kind of moving target. So it used to mean managing work used to mean managing a team of associates, but now it means like managing AI agents, right? I think one of the most important skills going forward is going to be delegation and context switching using AI agents. I mean, the best developers that we have here at Legora, like they're continually using different agents to assign work to, and then monitoring the output of what those agents are doing. And so the management of work is going to be much more important. And then, of course, the sourcing of the work, the finding of the work, the relationship building. People are still going to want to buy from people they trust. Like they are not going to want to put their trust, especially for the most premium of work. They're not going to want to, trust a machine with those kind of bet the company type cases, or the equivalent for their personal lives. And so people are still going to want to. People buy from people is kind of the saying in sales, and I think it's true for lawyers as well. It's like people want to hire people, and those skills are becoming much more important. So there is this irony that as AI, sort of replaces a lot of what was done before with humans, it's actually making humans more valuable in the end, because the things that are truly human, right, about us are actually the things that are accruing even more value.
I love that answer, Kyle. That's good. And I've noticed too, people appreciate mistakes in writing a bit more now because it's coming from a human, little small
Yes.
grammatical mistakes. It's really interesting to see how the effect has pushed us. And I completely agree to value the humanity in things. Last question I want to ask to you is about questions you don't get enough when it comes to Legora, when it comes to LLM use generally. And you've mentioned so many good examples in this podcast too, but is there anything that you haven't talked about that you think more lawyers should be thinking about when it comes to AI?
Yeah, it's all over the map in terms of like where people are. Obviously I'm having tons of conversations about this. And sometimes it's like a lot of firms they're just now getting around to they need to act on AI. So for them, a lot of times their partners are still grappling with what this is going to mean. They still don't understand what the tools are capable of. I mean, probably that's the biggest misconception I think for broadly is people don't know how far the tools have come in the past 6 months. I mean, I think if there was one thing, it's probably that. It's that some people are in the know, but like the models have with Opus 4.6 back in December, with Claude Code, Claude Codex, as well as Claude Cowork, right? These have been massive leaps forward in terms of what the foundational models are capable of doing. And people are still stuck, a lot of particularly lawyers like who maybe tried ChatGPT a year or two ago, like they think that's where the technology still is today. And it absolutely, like, if they concluded a year ago, if you're a lawyer out there who used ChatGPT or used one of these tools a year ago and concluded like it wasn't ready for prime time, like you were right. Like it wasn't these AI wasn't ready for prime time in legal practice. A year ago, the ROI of leaning into AI was really about just getting prepared for the future, right? It was doing some of the legwork of like upskilling your people ahead of time rather than having to play catch up now. So I think that probably the biggest misconception is is just not knowing how good the tools have gotten. So if you haven't seen a demo recently, like you owe it to yourself to see a demo or to play around with one of these kind of frontier platforms, either a legal specific tool or just something like Claude Code or Claude Cowork. So that's kind of one aspect of that. I would say the other piece is stuff we already kind of touched on, right? Which is a lot of firms not thinking about the incentive structures, or not thinking deeply enough about that. But it is changing. I will say the quality of questions and even just the quality of dialogue that I'm seeing on podcasts, that I'm seeing on panels, has stepped up in the past 3 months. So not only have like the models and the technology have gotten a lot better, but people are starting to get it.
Yeah.
So it used to be where I would watch podcasts. It'd be very rare that I would see somebody say something new, but like I do hear new things on podcasts. So it's, or things that I hadn't heard before. So I think that people are figuring this out, which just creates more pressure on other people that need to figure it out too, right?
Yeah.
Like there's still time, but like everyone else is trying to figure this out. And so there really is only one path forward, which is for, people's firms and individual lawyers out there to figure it out as well.
Yeah. No, I agree, Kyle. And I know I said last question, but you just mentioned the frontier LLMs and something came up. Just wondering where you see, because a lot of the lawyers, when I mentioned that I was speaking with you, quite a few of them had a similar question, which is where do you see the moat existing for a company like Legora when it comes to the frontier LLMs, things like Claude, ChatGPT, where they're now integrating with Word, they're doing other things that traditionally we thought of as sort of the layer that Legora would capture. Where's that value sitting for a company like Legora in the future?
Yeah, so I think one thing about even the foundation model companies or frontier companies, like you might ask a similar question about like what's their moats, and I think that one thing they will tell you is they will say, well, there are no moats, right? Like with AI, right? If you sit still, you're dead. Like if ChatGPT or
Right.
Gemini or one of these other companies, if they just stopped advancing their models, like they would be irrelevant in a matter of months. And the same is true with Legora, right? Like we have to continually innovate. I would actually probably turn it and say like you should be skeptical of those players that do have moats because they're gonna be resting on their laurels. Now, as far as like the frontier companies or foundation model companies coming into the legal space, I think it's purely just a fact that they saw massive usage, right? Like it's validation. It's a validation. Like Claude going into legal or focusing on it is validation of sort of Legora's even entire existence, right? It's that the
And
idea of law plus AI being this natural fit and this hugely valuable use case, domain for applying these tools. They saw how successful we were and how other companies are being super successful, and they figure they can play in that space too. I think at the end of the day, it's good for the industry. It's good for us. As Claude is thinking about, as Anthropic's thinking about legal use cases, they're going to be testing to ensure their models are highly performant for legal specific use cases. And so, given that these foundation models are the engines that power a platform like Legora, which is a model agnostic platform, as those engines get better, Legora is going to get better as well. So we think it's going to be, really a good thing for Legora that they're focusing on this. Um, we think that in terms of you know enterprise companies today who are looking at large firms, large corporate legal departments, I encourage them all to not ignore Claude. I think or any of these the frontier companies. I think it's important to pay attention to what they're doing because if nothing else, it gives you a couple of month preview into where maybe some of the legal specific platforms are going. So I think it's important to pay attention to them. But at the end of the day, Claude Cowork, for example, is a desktop application. And that is a information governance nightmare, right? Like you do not want if what I'm saying about knowledge and experience and agentic skills is really important, like you need to be able to have those exist in a secure collaborative platform. A platform where somebody's not going to walk out the door with a copy of the agentic skills of the firm. And so if you're using a desktop application, it becomes a lot easier for somebody to kind of exfiltrate that data outside of the firm. Whereas if you're using a kind of an enterprise built solution, it's going to, obviously we're going to take into account like all the kind of permissioning layers that are needed for that. And I think, the other piece of this too is we're a product company, but we're also a change management company. I think one major differentiator, one reason for our success is obviously we've got an amazing product that is just, I think the best of anybody in legal today. But we also have the best change management team. So, we talk about the legal engineers coming on site and working with partners. Like that's something that I don't think the foundation model companies are going to be doing. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe they're going to go off and hire, 70, 80 legal engineers to support like a very deep sales motion into legal. We haven't seen anything like that. I think what we're going to see for them is similar to what we've seen, for many, many years with Microsoft. Microsoft has kind of waxed and waned in terms of coming into the legal space. Things like, people remember out there, SharePoint used to have like this matter management center, but then, they didn't really do too much with that. So it's, there will always be a place for kind of enterprise legal specific solutions that are built from the ground up that we not only are selling a product, but we're also helping drive the change that is necessary,
Mm.
right? And so that's all ultimately going to be one of the things that continues to differentiate us going forward.
Yeah, data frameworks and data management was something every lawyer I spoke to for the podcast I did on how lawyers are using AI. It was about 13 lawyers in-house private practice. That's their number one concern. And I can see that being a point of emphasis going forward. Kyle, it was a lot of fun to talk to you. The future is going to be very exciting. I'm sure we'll have you back on again. Thanks for joining me.
Yeah, thank you.